Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about the third-person omniscient point of view, or, for the sake of brevity, the Omni POV. First, I'm going to discuss what the Omni POV is and how it differs from other points of view, and then I'm going to talk about what kind of stories it works best for, so that you can decide whether or not to employ it in your own fiction. After that, I'm going to talk a little bit about its history, and then I'll end with some novel recommendations that will allow you to gain a better, deeper understanding of how the Omni POV works in practice. All right, let's head to it. The first thing I'd like to say is that there's always a bit of wiggle room when it comes to defining things like point of view, so what I'm about to say about the Omni POV will apply in most cases, but not all. Just keep that in mind as we proceed. Okay, so the first characteristic of the Omni POV is that the narrator, that is, the person telling the tale, does not take part in the events or action proper. This is of course true of all third-person narrators, but it's important to mention because quite often in the Omni POV the narrator is visible, meaning you know that you're dealing with a narrator who has an existence separate from the story being told. It's sort of like your grandmother telling you a story, not about her life, but just a story. And that's very distinct from, say, the third-person limited point of view, where you sort of get the sense that the things that are happening are merely being recorded by an unknown observer. The third person in the Omni POV is actually someone telling you a story. But the truly defining characteristic of the Omni POV is the ability of the narrator to follow around any character at will, even going so far as to record various characters' thoughts. This is what's meant by omniscience, the ability to know everything. Here again, we can distinguish this from the third-person limited point of view, where we are limited to the point of view of just one character, and also from the first-person point of view, where again, we're limited to just the perspective of the I. Not this I, but this one. Now, occasionally you'll come across a novel that, say, switches the limited point of view from chapter to chapter, so that you follow the sensations of one character in one chapter, and then the sensations of a different character in the next. If in each instance all you get in those chapters are what the particular character is privy to, then that's not omniscience, but rather alternating limited points of view. The reason why this confusion exists is that in a lot of cases, authors writing from an Omni POV will also restrict themselves to following around just one character per chapter. But what they do in addition is, they add some remarks or commentary that are clearly not those of the character being focused on. This has to do with what I said earlier about the narrator having to be in some way visible, and therefore separable from a given character. The narrator has his own life independent of the story he is telling. It just so happens that he's currently telling a story. Okay, so let's look at how a master uses the Omni POV. Here we have a passage from George Eliot's Middlemarch. By the way, if your screen is too small to read this, I'm putting the full passage in the description. Just pause the video and come back to it when you're done reading. Now, what I've done here is highlight the shifts in point of view as I see them, using different colors for each character whose point of view is on display. I've also used green for the narrator's comments, which are extrinsic to the scene proper. First, note the narrator's use of the word I at one point. That's the sort of thing I meant when I said that the narrator will define him or herself separate from the cast of characters actually involved in the story. So too is the sentence that begins, "perhaps the person who felt the most throbbing excitement," because that is a judgment by the narrator about the scene. True, it tells you something about the feelings of Mary Garth in relation to the others, but it's clearly been worded as a judgment call on the part of the narrator, rather than something Mary Garth herself is thinking as she awaits the reading of the will. Second, notice how many shifts from character to character there are. Even though I've elided some dialogue and whatnot in order to shorten the passage up a bit, the passage quoted is still less than 2 pages long, and yet it provides you with the perspectives of, let's say, 6 characters. Of course, the entire novel doesn't read like this. Typically, there aren't that many shifts from character to character. But the scene I'm quoting from is so critical to everyone involved that the narrator wisely chooses to move about the room so that we as readers know just exactly where everyone stands with regard to the will that is about to be read off. And this, of course, is what makes the Omni POV so distinct from other points of view. A first person or a limited third narrator can only hint at or make suppositions about what other characters might be thinking at that critical moment. but an Omni POV can get right into the heads of every character and tell you exactly what everyone is thinking and feeling. Of course, the Omni POV isn't right for every kind of story, so let's talk about when you might want to employ it in your own fiction. The first and perhaps the best reason to use the Omni POV is when you want to present some kind of collective experience. It could be that you're trying to capture a particular time and place, or that you're trying to show the temperament of an entire nation, or maybe you just want to show how the members of a single family respond to each other and the world. Whatever the case, the Omni POV may be the best way to tease out this collective experience. Another reason for using the Omni POV may be that you want to tackle some big idea from multiple angles, and you need a full cast of characters to really bring this idea to life, to show how the idea is spread out across many different types of people and affects their lives. For example, if you wanted to write about the concept of justice, you may need to have characters who are lawyers and lawmakers and suspected criminals and victims of crime, and so on. And you may want to show how all these people respond, that is, how they experience justice. Again, the Omni POV may be the best way to show this. A third reason for using the Omni POV may be that you have a character whose essence can only be captured by having those around him weigh in on who he really is. In this case, you might use the Omni POV as a way of showing other people's thoughts about that character. Or you might have a conversation between secondary characters about the main character when the main character isn't around. You get the idea. And it's that same idea that leads us to the final reason I'll mention here for using the Omni POV, which is that you want to capture all of your characters' views on a particular incident or event, or perhaps a series of events. Say there's some significant accident like an earthquake. By using the Omni POV, you can move about from character to character as they try to deal with the aftermath. Of course, the best possible scenario is that you use the Omni POV for all of these reasons at once, and perhaps others I haven't mentioned here. That way you give your readers a full experience of a time and place, of the ideas raised there, of the people who populate this place, and of the events that occur. In the end, though, it always comes back to what works best for your story. Now, let's talk a little bit about the history of the Omni POV. Back in the 19th century, the Omni POV was perhaps the dominant point of view. First person also had some sway, but the Omni POV was pretty big. But eventually the Omni POV all but went extinct, and the arguments as to why it became less popular are varied. The most popular argument is that the Omni POV is sort of like a god, and as writers and their readers became less religious, the idea of a godlike POV became less popular. Now, I don't want to discount this hypothesis entirely, but I do think it's overblown a bit. For example, Leo Tolstoy and George Eliot, who arguably wrote the two best Omni POV novels ever, were essentially both non-believers at the time they wrote those novels. Although it's hard to say with Tolstoy because he sort of jumped around when it came to his beliefs. Now, someone might say to me that it isn't that writers or their readers lost their beliefs that led to the unpopularity of the Omni POV, but that they stopped reading the Bible. The claim here is that the Bible was a huge influence on style for writers, that they developed their own styles from it. To this I say, first, the Bible isn't a great example of the Omni POV. It's just too rudimentary to be used as a template. Second, the Bible has various points of view, not just an omniscient one. And third, writers had other books available to them as well, and could just as easily have allowed themselves to be influenced by these other writings. Personally, I think the push towards individualism and individual rights played a much bigger role. For a long time, people were always tied to this tribe, this culture, this nation. But as that broke down, that is, when each individual was given rights, the idea of writing collective novels became less appealing. Everything became about the individual, so of course a writer would choose to stick to one character, either in third limited or in the first-person point of view. My guess is also that readers preferred this as well, because they too came to see the world through an individualistic rather than a collectivist lens. And this sense of individualism likely also led writers to push for their own originality, to try to make themselves stand out. And one way to do that is to invent new styles that aren't necessarily commensurate with an Omni POV. Of course, it's hard to know any of this for sure. There could be many other reasons as well. The point is that the popularity of the Omni novel did drop off, which leads us to our next question. Can the Omni POV make a comeback? Some have suggested that it already has, though it's really just a book here or there. And in a way, that's as it should be. Writers should only employ any POV when that's the right POV for their story. So what all this comes down to then is, will the writers of the future want to tell stories that are best suited for the Omni POV? My answer to that is a cautionary yes. I think that with the popularity of multiculturalism, the idea of viewing life collectively has made a comeback. And so it wouldn't surprise me if more and more writers choose to use the Omni POV in order to convey that collectivism. My one issue with this is that part of what is fueling this collectivism is the notion of cultural determinism, which is both philosophically and scientifically problematic. So there's a risk that the Omni POV novels that come out of this ideology won't be very good. That said, writers tend to be at their best when they're writing, so it's just possible that they will rise above their errors of thought and create some really great art. Another possibility which might spur its comeback is that because of the breakdown of traditional social groups, people are trying to form their own. My own novel, Me and Gepe, actually hints at that, though I use the first-person point of view. But a novel which wishes to tackle this subject head-on might very well use the Omni POV. Anyway, it's food for thought. Okay, so maybe you want to read some Omni POV novels in order to get a better feel for them, in order to decide whether this point of view is right for your story. If so, you can check out any of these authors, as they all employed the Omni POV in at least some of their novels. But the three novels I'm going to recommend now are War and Peace, Middlemarch, and Reservation Blues. As I've already hinted at, the first two are arguably the two greatest novels ever written in the Omni POV, so they're obviously worth checking out. Reservation Blues by Sherman Alexie is a contemporary example, and what's great about it is it employs all kinds of techniques within the Omni POV framework. In other words, Alexie shows you just what you can do with an Omni POV in this day and age. Alright, that's about it. If you have some additional thoughts about the Omni POV, or if you'd like to share with me what your favorite Omni POV novels are, go ahead and place all that in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Toodaloo!